I do see here, welcome to Canadian Mortgage Weekly Live. We're going to be going into buy now or buying when rates drop here in Canada. This is a very common question I'm getting. I'm getting a lot of clients asking me this question. It seems that a lot of people have different opinions as well, which is also causing a little bit of an issue across just having a consensus about what's going on. But essentially, I want to go into, is it better to buy now when rates are still higher, or is it better to buy when rates drop? And that's going to be uh, totally up to you. But if you're waiting and you're ready to buy now, it's going to be a good episode for you to dive into, because I'm going to be putting together some numbers for us. And then if you're interested in these numbers, I'm going to be putting them into a spreadsheet. And you can just send me a message afterwards, and I'll share this spreadsheet with you, and you can use it for your own personal use as well. There'll be some formulas in here you can play with, but essentially it's going to be a spreadsheet comparing buy now versus buying later. And I'm going to be doing this across 4 different categories as well, everyone. I'm going to be doing this across first-time buyer, which is the 500,000 price range. So that's like a new just like a resale condo in Toronto. You can get something really affordable for 500,000 in some markets in Toronto. You can look at a second-time buyer as well, which is going to be the 750,000 range. We're going to be looking at the $1 million range, which is to me considered sort of the move up buyer. You've been in that second home now for a few years. It's time to move up. Maybe your family's gotten a little bigger, and that's 1 million. And then we're going to be looking at the luxury buyer, which is around the $1.5 million mark. This is not representative of Toronto, but it's more representative of small town Canada. I'm in Aurelia, which is surrounded by other communities like Barrie, Ontario, and Midland, Ontario, as well as Bradford, Ontario, sort of in that Simcoe County area, Innisfil. So let's get right into this here. We're going to be covering off, is it better to buy now versus later? So first I wanted to look at, is it better to buy now versus later in regards to the rate? So the rate will be about 5.5%. You can probably get a little bit lower, maybe in the 5% range if you have really good credit and you want to get an insured mortgage. But say if you're buying and you have average credit and you're getting an uninsured mortgage, you're going to be getting about 5.5% on that money right now. And that's today's rate. And if you're going to compare it based on rate alone, then 5.5% versus what they're forecasting rates to be at in 2026, you're going to be probably picking buying later, because buying later is scheduled to give you a rate of around 4%. And 4% is the number I'm hearing across the consensus here from other lenders, forecasters, other mortgage professionals, and they're sort of predicting that 4% is where rates will drop to when rates do drop. And taking a look at that myself, I've looked at the charts historically, and when rates drop, they do tend to drop quite drastically and quite considerably very quickly. So just getting now into what rates are going to be at in 2026, we talked about that. That's going to be 4%. So let's now look at the house prices as well. Are the house prices forecasted to be better or worse in 2026? Well, they're forecasted by CMHC to hit peak levels. And when we take a look at peak levels, we see that in February of 2022, we did hit a peak level of house prices in Canada. And if I take a look at the average house price in 2022 in February at that peak level versus now, we do see it's about a 17% drop right now between February of 2022 and now. Now, we've seen a little bit of a recovery. We did see about a 30% drop when it first happened, but right now we're 17% low. So they're talking about house prices readjusting back to those peak levels. So if we take a look at a $500,000 home, using that same metric at hitting peak levels, that same increase in percentage rate, we're going to be seeing a $584,500 home. And if we look at 750,000 respectively, it'll be a $876,750 home. And if we look at a move up buyer, which is buying a $1 million home today versus in 2026 would be 1.169 million. And a luxury buyer in 2024 buying a home for 1.5 million, buying one for 1.753 in 2026 at that lower rate. So what's going to be better in terms of payment? Well, let's take a look at that next here. And remember, if you're watching this and you want a copy of the spreadsheet I'm putting together here on this podcast, looking at is it better to buy now versus later, send me a message or book an appointment with me and we can go over that together. But I'm happy to share that spreadsheet with you. And all you got to do is just let me know what your email address is and I'll just send you an email with that spreadsheet. So happy to share that with you. Maybe that can help you with your home search. So let's look at the first time buyer, buying now versus later in terms of the payment. So say you're putting 5% down. So let's take a look at that. Well, we looked at an uninsured mortgage. So in this case, we're putting 20% down. So so the mortgage will be $400,000 for the first time home buyer. And at 5.5%, that gives a biweekly payment of $1,126 and a monthly payment of $2,442. Now, the equity in 5 years, that's sort of where I wanted to see next, is if you're paying this off in 5 years, what is your total payments going to add up to? And what's your balance going to be at? And the balance will be down to $356,749. So you've paid off about almost $45,000 worth of principal there. So that's great. That's great. Mortgage in 5. So as I mentioned, if you want a copy of these numbers, let me know. I'm happy to send them to you. We can send that to you and you can have those numbers in your inbox so you can compare them on your own terms. So 5.5%, you're going to be looking at monthly payment on a $500,000 entry-level home of $2,442 or biweekly $1,126. And equity in 5 years, you're going to have $43,250 additional built-up equity in 5 years, and that's using a 25-year mortgage. Now let's look at what that will look like at 4%. So at 4%, and this is the interest rate that is scheduled to come down to in 2026 by a lot of mortgage professionals, a lot of people just that are in the industry. So monthly $2,105. I'm already seeing a $300 reduction, but am I taking into account the additional mortgage? Let's take a look at that here. Down payment. Mortgage. And set guys. So down payment is that times So we got a little bit down payment. Down payment is an additional 16,900 compared to right now. So you're putting an additional $16,900 down to make sure that you're going to have 20% down. Your mortgage is a little higher too at $467,600. So that's a little different as well. So something to be concerned about there. But let's look at the equity in 5 years. So if your mortgage is $467,600, monthly you're paying $24.60, and bi-weekly you're paying $11.35. And then in 5 years, you've paid down the mortgage to $407.65, which leaves you with an amount of equity. Is it going to be higher or lower? So it leaves you with $60,535 in equity, additional amount of equity. So it does give you more equity. So if we take a look at them side by side now, there's something that I'm uncovering. If we wait until rates go down to 4%, we will see prices hit peak levels, right? So you're paying more for the home, but you're paying a lower percentage point. Now, because we're paying more for the home, the monthly payment is slightly higher. It's about $18 higher for the same home today. However, in the 5-year time frame using the 4%, even though the rates are lower and the monthly payment is higher and you're paying more for the home, you're actually building more equity in the next 5 years of $60,535 versus $43,250 at the higher interest rate. But that still doesn't matter because the amount of mortgage you have left after the 5 years, using the higher rate and the lower price, overall gave you less down payment and less mortgage at the end of 5 years. Because when you compare the ending balances, even though you're paying more off and less interest, when rates go down, you're paying slightly more for the home, you're left with a considerably lower mortgage amount on the today versus when rates come down, because we're paying off a smaller loan amount. And that final mortgage amount in 5 years comes out to $356,750 using the 5.5% today amount versus 4% in 2 years in 2026, leaving you with an ending mortgage balance of $407.65. So waiting until rates drop, you will pay less interest, but you will have to pay more principal off, and you'll have to pay more principal off because houses will be more and you'll have a higher loan balance. And is it really worth having a higher loan balance versus paying a little bit more interest up front? I don't know. I'm seeing some benefits of buying right now. Let's take a look at the second time buyer now. This would be buying a $750,000 home. Let's see if I get the same results using the second time buyer $750,000 price range home. This in my market can get you a entry level detached home, and one that can either get you in the market with some improvements needed, or an older dated home that doesn't really need any that just really needs maintenance, ongoing maintenance, but is dated. All right, so taking a look at $750,000, if we're looking at a down payment on that, 20% down, 150,000 versus buying when rates drop. Your down payment then will be about $25,000 higher because of the higher purchase price at $175,350. The mortgage amount required today for a $750,000 home would be $600,000. And the mortgage required in 2 years, if we wait until rates drop, will be a little higher at $701,400, representing an over $101,000 increase in the mortgage amount required to get into the housing market. Now let's look at the payments. A $600,000 mortgage for a house today at 5.5% with a 20% down bi-weekly would run you a payment of $1,689. If you're looking at a monthly payment, you're looking at $36.63. If you think these are high payments, they are, because payments have gone up because interest rates have gone up. And there's a lot of people buying homes these days paying this amount and not really saying anything about it. So the equity in 5 years, well, your mortgage is actually down to $535,124.92, which leaves you with an additional $64,875 in equity. Okay, let's take a look at buying in 2 years now. What's the monthly? 4%, but your mortgage is slightly higher. So your monthly will be $36.90, which represents a $27 increase to versus buying now at the higher interest rate. Bi-weekly, you're looking at $17.02, and that represents a $23 bi-weekly increase versus buying now. What's your equity in 5 years if you bought in 2 years when rates go down to about 4%? You pay down your mortgage to $610,595. And 57 cents, which then gives you an additional amount of equity, $90,804. So if we compare a $750,000 home, buying that today, you're paying $3,663 per month for that home if you're paying about 5.5%. But if you bought that home in 2026, when rates are forecasted to fall to 4%, you're going to be paying more per month at $36.90 per month and be left with a higher mortgage amount after 5 years, even though you're paying off more principal versus now if you bought at today's rate. So it's really a worse situation in both the first-time buyer price range, which is the $500,000 price range, and a more magnified difference on the second-time buyer price range. Let's take a look at the $1 million price range today and see where we end up there. I'm really interested to find out, does it keep getting worse as we keep going? Because that's really fascinating here, guys. And if you're just joining me now, if you want a copy of my spreadsheet, send me an email or a note on Facebook or something like that, Twitter, TikTok, wherever you're watching. I'd be happy to send you a copy of the spreadsheet that I'm using to make these numbers come together here today. We've looked at a $500,000 home, a $750,000 home. Now let's take a look at a $1 million home, buying that today versus when rates drop in 2026. So buying a $1 million home today would require a down payment of $200,000, which represents 20%. If you bought a home in 2026 when rates dropped to 4%, you're looking at paying a little bit more for the home because rates have come down. And CMHC is forecasting that home prices hit peak levels again of 2022 levels. So using that metric, you're spending more for the home and more for the down payment, which is now $233,800. So an additional $33,800 on that down payment. Okay. If your down payment is that much more, that leaves you with a mortgage amount of $935,000, $935,200 if you're buying later. But buying now leaves you with a mortgage amount of $800,000. So a mortgage amount of over $100,000 more if you're buying later. So that is a concern right away, because even if you're paying less money on the interest, you're still going to be paying way more of the principal off and spending way more time spending money paying that principal off. Let's take a look at the mortgage amounts and see how the payments stack up. So buying now a mortgage of $800,000 for a $1 million property of 5.5%. Bi-weekly, it's running you $22.51. Monthly, that's running us $48.84. If we look at 5.5% versus 4%, 4% would give us a monthly payment of $42.09 at $800,000, which would be a less monthly payment. However, we have to factor in a higher mortgage amount of $935,200 because of the higher purchase amount that we're paying, because house prices have hit their peaks. So at 4% for a higher mortgage amount, we're paying $4,920 monthly, versus bi-weekly is going to be $22.69. Wow. So already I'm seeing huge differences in the prices, the percentages, but the difference in now versus later is starting to come closer together. It's not as different as it was before in the lower price ranges. The spread seems lower, but let's keep looking at it here. Let's look at what the equity amount and mortgage amount remaining is in 5 years. If we take a look at a monthly payment, if we take a look at 5 years at an interest rate of 4%, you're left with a balance of $814, $128.28, which leaves you with an additional amount of equity, additional $121,071.70 worth of equity. You've paid off essentially this much of your mortgage. Fantastic. Let's see how much equity you build at 5.5% and see what your ending loan value would be there. So after 5 years, your loan is actually a lower amount than at the lower interest rate. This is because we're spending less money on the house when rates are higher. Keep that in mind. And the equity position on that home goes up $83,499 in that amount of time. Wow, is that really true? That is fantastic at 5%. Wow. However, you're still paying more on the interest rate, and you've still paid less equity in the 5-year time frame versus 4%. However, you are left with a smaller loan amount, $716,500 versus $814,128 in 2 years. So what we've seen now so far, if you're just joining me today, right now, is that in all three scenarios, first-time buyer, $500,000 price range, $750,000 price range, which is the second-time buyer, and then the move-up buyer, which is the $1 million price range. If we buy today at 5.5%, we're paying less money for the home, and we're ending up with a lower balance of the ending mortgage balance for that home in 5 years versus the one person that is buying in 2 years when rates fall because they're paying more for the home, consequently getting a higher loan balance. And then because of the higher loan balance, having to pay off more principal to kind of catch up to that other person that bought today at the higher interest rate and at the lower loan balance. So there's a lot of factors to consider when evaluating whether or not, as a home buyer or a home seller, that is it better for you to buy now or buy later. But there's one thing for sure, and that is that I always recommend having the lowest amount of outstanding debt as possible to live a satisfying life full of joy. You don't want to be ever crushed and crumbled by the amount of debt burden you have. So simply by following the rule of trying to end up with as little debt as possible and using as little money as possible to achieve your goals, buying today actually makes smarter sense if we take a look at the CMHC article saying that home prices will hit peak levels in 2026 as fact. And if that's the case, spending a little bit less money on the house today, but a little bit more money on the interest today, would still get your loan payments paid and give you a lower loan amount in 5 years compared to if you waited. So a lot of uncertainty in this world, and there's a lot of uncertainty if rates will actually fall in 5 years or in 2 years in 2026. And also in 5 years from then, who knows where rates will be after that point. One thing's for certain, buying today will give you a lower loan balance at the end of 5 years versus buying in 2 years when rates come down and house prices peak again. So if you're making the smart decision and want to get things started today so you're ready to go, and when I say ready to go on any home that you see on the market, make sure you book an appointment with me using the link in the video description below, where you can actually book the time in my calendar for a 5-minute call. We can have a quick conversation as to where you're at. That can help you determine your maximum mortgage amount. And from there, we can decide if you want to submit that for a formal pre-approval, which guarantees you financing in a way where you as the client are good. It's just up to the property at that point to pass the lender inspection. So with that, please do contact me. I've been financing real estate for 14 years. I'd be happy to help you get started buying your first home or second home or move up buyer home today. And if you want a copy of my spreadsheet, I'll make sure it's ready and done for you guys. You can just send me a message. I'll be happy to send you a copy, essentially comparing buying now versus buying later when rates fall in 2026. All right, so thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you have an awesome day. And this has been episode 177 of Canadian Mortgage.